Hello and welcome. Thank you for taking time to tune into our channel. If you're new, please hit like and subscribe below. Today, we're going to be presenting on defamation. What is defamation? The types of defamation, examples of defamation, instances, and ways around defamation for media practitioners. Without any further ado, let us move on to the first presentation. Thank you.
The defamatory words are, the applicant is a prostitute. Now, I've already alluded to whom these statements were made. Imagine calling a married woman, a grandmother, a prostitute in front of the whole family, in the vicinity of hearing neighbors. This is the highest form of defamatory disrespect. Now, because the defendant has not made claims to protect their statements, it is implied that the utterances were made and the utterances have no basis. Now, the question is, what is defamation? Above is an extract from Khan versus Khan 1971, which was a case between a husband and a wife, where the husband called the wife a prostitute, and it was not true. So then he had to pay £150 in damages. The law of defamation aims to create a satisfactory balance between two competing ends. On the right hand, it is the aim to protect an individual from harm of reputation according to Section 86 of the Zimbabwean Constitution. And on the left hand is another aim to allow individuals to have self-expression, individuals in the media, individuals in art, and those who are singers, according to Section 61 of the Zimbabwean Constitution. Now, I will give you an example. Imagine Sunday Mail, the national newspaper where individuals are waiting to have information from them. They have an audience that is large enough to be able to take down an individual as big and as respected as the president. So, which means the law of defamation is there to make sure that the reputation of an individual is not harmed because of stupid decisions, anxiety, anger, or jest. Now again, it brings us to the question, what is defamation? Now, according to Pemba and Calvert, they gave us a couple of definitions. One was, defamation is inflicting harm on an individual's reputation just so you have the fun of it. Or the other definition, communication that is aimed at affecting the reputation of an individual. Now, the reputation of an individual is different from the character of an individual. The reputation of an individual is what people believe they are, and the character of an individual is what the person actually is. But then at the same time, if you damage an individual's reputation, it's hard to fix it. In fact, in reality, it cannot be fixed. Just like William Shakespeare says, if you steal my purse, you rob me of trash. It is something, it is nothing. But if you rob me of my good name, you steal something which does not enrich you, but rather makes me poor indeed. To come up are the causes.
There are two types of defamation, libel, slander. According to Hamilton and Phelps, page 136, the book entitled Libel. Libel is a defamatory statement that is permanent and is published in broadcasting forms and in written forms. In the context of media and PR ethics, media is very crucial and important. Why? This is because all forms of media and PR ethics are published in broadcasting terms such as radio, televisions, magazines, and newspapers, and they are permanent and written. Libel is considered not to have conditions. This is because it is actionable per se, and it is procured not to have occurred.
When it comes to slander defamation, there are things that the court regards as too important to provide proof when you want to file a defamation case. The first thing being imputation of criminal conduct punishable by an imprisonment. Such cases you don't need to have proof because it's too serious for the court to actually ignore. The second thing being imputation of contagious or infectious disease. For example, if I go to another person in the presence of other people and I say that you are the one who's spreading Ebola or Corona, is something that is defaming and something that the court will regard as serious is a serious matter. The third thing being imputation of sexual immorality. For example, if one person rapes another person, that case cannot be ignored because it's too serious for the court to ignore, and that you can actually file a defamation case when someone actually says something about you that is false with regards to sexual immorality. Okay, and the last thing being imputation injurious to another's official, professional or business career. Let's take for example, when someone says that a certain lecturer is being bribed to allocate better marks to individuals or students that are otherwise worse off, and also maybe a guard is being accused of stealing something from the University of Zimbabwe that we are in right now. That is very injurious to one's career, and the court will be obligated to look into that issue. Thank you.
Imagine waking up with your name making headlines on some of the biggest newspapers in Zimbabwe. I'm talking about the Herald, Sunday Mail, H Metro. You'll be shocked, right? Hi guys, my name is Cheza, and I'll be taking you through some of the legal defamation court cases that have occurred in Zimbabwe. But before we get into that, I'm going to define two terms that we're going to be using throughout this whole video. The first one being the defendant. A defendant is a person who's being accused or sued in the court of law. And the next term that I'm going to be defining is a plaintiff. A plaintiff is a person who's accusing or suing someone in the court of law. The first case that I'm going to be looking at is Tekere versus the Zimbabwe newspaper in 1986. The Zimbabwe newspaper in 1986, they accused Tekere of being lazy, inefficient, and they accused him that on his time that he's supposed to be working, he'll be spending his time womanizing. Brutal, right? I know. The final verdict on this case was in favor of Tekere, and the defendant had to pay $20,000 in compensation to Tekere. The second case that we're going to be looking at is Bikwa versus Ndlovu. The defendant made false accusations of an immoral relationship between the plaintiff and the defendant's wife. And they also accused the plaintiff of abusing his powers. The final verdict of this case was in favor of the plaintiff, and the defendant had to pay $5,500 for compensation. The last case that we're going to be looking at is Magwede versus Dube in 2014. The defendant accused a female musician of being a prostitute and a drug addict. All these accusations were baseless. Therefore, the final verdict was in favor of the plaintiff, and they won the case. Thank you very much.
So now we're moving on to the second type of defamation, which is slander. But before we look into the court cases which talk about defamation of character involving slander, a good example of slander defamation was the one which was made by the first speaker, as the statement he made contained untrue defamatory statements against the viewer, thereby hurting the viewer's reputation. So the first case we're going to be looking at is that of Haas versus Greaterman Stores. So in this case, the defendant, being Greaterman Stores, made a verbal insinuation against the plaintiff that he was shoplifting in front of bystanders. So the verdict was made in favor of the plaintiff, who was awarded 500 euros for defamation of character. The second case we're going to be looking at is that of Nyamanza versus Kambaza. So in this case, the defendant made an accusation against the headmaster that he was inefficient, and also of abandonment of duty, and also of engaging in sexual immorality with co-workers. So the verdict was made in favor of the headmaster, who received 5,000 units for defamation of character and false inefficiency. So the third case we're going to be looking at is that of Musukutwa versus Marova. So in this case, the defendant made a claim against a worker that he had caused the death of another workmate through witchcraft means or similar means. So in this case, the verdict was made in favor of the plaintiff, who was awarded for damages of defamation of character.
You can get in a lawsuit. Firstly, there is a loss of wages. Let's check, for example, a certain person is employed in a certain company and your reputation is ruined. Obviously, you might be demoted at your position or fired from the company. Secondly, there is interest in the cost of the case. These costs include the cost of hiring a lawyer and time wasted. Not only that, pain and suffering. These are mental implications that the accusers goes through. Lastly, punitive damages. These are payments made by the defendant person when he or she is found guilty.
I'm Shaniko Wellam, and I'm going to be presenting on what defenses can be raised to actions for defamation. It is necessary first to state why defenses are not available in the Zimbabwean law. As the present law imposes strict liability, it is in no defense that the publisher of a defamatory statement had no intention to defame. It is in no defense that the publisher of the defamatory statement genuinely believed the statement to be true and that it was in the public interest to publish that information if the statement was in fact false and defamatory. So the main defenses currently available are justification, truth, jest, privilege, consent, and compensation. And today I'm going to be presenting on those. Firstly, it is in defense that P gave his consent to the publication to publish their defamatory statement. Secondly, anger or Rixa. This is a very limited defense and has very little application on the press. Basically, this is when D makes a defamatory statement on P, and as a response to serious provocation from P, D responds in anger and says some serious defamatory statements. Thirdly, privilege. The law states that in certain circumstances, the person has got social, moral, and legal right to transmit information from one person to another. Therefore, the person has the right to do so. Lastly, jest. This is when D makes a defamatory statement on P without the intention to hurt P in the presence of the audience. This means that P would have taken the statement personal, but rather D didn't mean to hurt their feelings. For example, in a class of math, Mr. Nkosana Maposa can tell Mbai that she is hard-headed and lazy, or rather banguza.
However, there are various ways which we can follow in order for us to avoid making claims of defamation. Number one, you need to be truthful. Abstain from making any statement that you cannot back up or verify when you are should. Number two, think carefully whenever you are writing a statement that's taking into consideration how your message can affect someone's reputation and also how a reasonable person can interpret it. Number three, be specific. Avoid making statements that are open or ambiguous. Number four, avoid posting things on social media when you are angry. This is because usually people do things they does not mean when they are angry. Number five, avoid associating with hate groups. If you want to accuse a person from committing an unlawful activity, you need to have strong evidence and also be able to explain. In addition, be cautious, especially when making statements about private citizens, because the law is usually less forgiving when you make statements about private citizens than public citizens.
Thank you for staying through to the end of our presentation. As you noticed, defamation is really about ruining a person's reputation, which is a really bad thing and cannot be quantified in terms of money. As once a person's reputation is lost, it is lost forever.